Hello and welcome to the debate on France24. I'm Andrea Sankey in Paris. Tonight, what to make of the final debate. It was the last formal showdown between the U.S. presidential candidates, Republican John McCain and Democrat Barack Obama. And though most agree neither candidate dealt a knockout punch, some say it was the best performance John McCain has delivered thus far. Still, the majority of polls taken after the face-off show Barack Obama with a clear lead. So tonight, we'll be looking at what went right and what went wrong for the presidential contenders last night at Hofstra University in New York, and we'll be debating some of the finer points of the debate with less than 3 weeks to go to this historic U.S. election. And joining me here in the studio very appropriately to my right, Stuart Helgen, Vice President of Republicans Abroad France.
Hello, thank you.
No problem. Here to my left, Zachary Miller, Chair of the Minority Caucus for Democrats Abroad. Joining us via satellite from New York, Jim McCarthy, Crisis Manager at Counterpoint Strategies, a communications consultant. And from San Francisco, Astro Teller, CEO of Cerebellum Capital and a young leader of the French-American Foundation. Thanks all so much for joining us tonight. Let me start here in the studio then to my left. Zachary, I'm sure you wouldn't agree in any way, shape, or form that McCain was a winner here, but would you at least concede that this was a better performance than the last two debates?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think he hit his stride this time. He was much better than he was the other two debates. But still, according to most of the polls I saw, Obama won commandingly. So there was, like you said, there was not a knockout. There was no, clear moments, as you say. But Obama won on points, we might say. But it was the message, the content, and also what I hear mostly is that Obama was more presidential. They like his demeanor. They like his thoughtfulness, his way of approaching the questions, and his way of answering the questions.
Okay. Stuart, I mean, why this contradiction here then? You know, everyone seems to concede that this was McCain's best. But CBS's poll of uncommitted voters, 53-22 in Obama's favor. CNN's poll of debate watchers, 58-31.
I think it's an interesting dichotomy, and I think it goes right to the core of the Obama presidency or his candidature. And in Kennedy's, that you have a candidate here who traditionally wins any kind of the speaking presentation endeavors, exposures, and yet at the same point in time, you still have 45% of Americans who say they're not sure he's ready to be president. So I think we're in a and if you take that 45% and then add the undetermined vote in this thing, you still have this game is not over at all. I think a lot of people, as Karl Rove said today and others have said, Barack Obama has not closed the sale with the American public. And I think if we didn't have this huge economic crisis bearing down on us and the desire to blame the Bush administration, and unfortunately an association with McCain, which I'm not sure is justified in this case, certainly in the economic case, I think this would be an incredibly tight race. In fact, Investors Business Daily rates this at a 3-point race, and they were the closest in 2004 in predicting the outcome, too. So I think this is up in the air.
Okay. Jim, joining us in New York, your thoughts?
Well, you know, McCain did better than before, but he seemed to miss the real uppercut opportunities. I mean, so often during the debate, I noticed how Obama wanted to have it both ways on questions. He wouldn't answer specifics, he hedged a lot, and there were so many opportunities for real knockout punches, and yet McCain seemed to stumble a little bit in delivering them. I mean, look at the country's on the verge of having an enormously leftward swing. Democrats in control of Congress, the most liberal member of the U.S. Senate as president, at the time when we're going through real tough economic straits. I mean, that could be economically catastrophic. And McCain needs to explain why that's bad. It's not enough to just point out his connections to left-wing groups or far-left radicals. He has to tell the public why that's bad and why it's so economically risky. That's where the uppercut lies, and I'm not sure McCain delivered that well enough.
Okay. Astro, let me get to your thoughts before I bring up one of the points Jim was alluding to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the seeming contradiction is not actually very mysterious. McCain delivered his best of the 3 debates last night because he came out swinging, as Jim just described it. But he showed himself in being a fighter to be a fighter the way, I'm speaking now as the American public may be perceiving it, like a sergeant would fight. maybe the way a major would fight, not the way the commander-in-chief would fight. And whatever else we want to say about both candidates, I think Obama won the debate by being presidential, by not taking cheap shots, and by taking the cheap shots that were taken at him elegantly. And so that's why it's possible for McCain to have had his best debate, because he was on the offensive, because he was very aggressive, and still to have lost in the sense that he showed people the kind of person he is, at least in that situation, more clearly, and they didn't like it very much.
Okay. Stuart, let me ask you, I mean, one of those cheap shots some people perceived was this, again, McCain insisting on driving through this relationship, this rather loose relationship Barack Obama had or has with former 60s radical Bill Ayers. I mean, I'm wondering what you make of that. Do you think that's kind of a vote-winning strategy there? Or do you accept that maybe it could work as a turnoff?
Well, obviously in politics you use what works. And for right now, at least it's not been effectively delivered to the point that it's working. At the same point in time, I find it incredibly problematic, and I also find it potentially media-driven that we're protecting Barack Obama on this issue rather than pushing the debate, because this is a guy, and his wife, by the way, who is worse than he is. She was number one on the most wanted list in 1970, and she actually was involved in having people ending up dying. Well, Ayers says we carefully avoided killing people. I wanted to blow up more. I'm sorry, this is not exactly a presidential relationship, in my mind.
Okay. Zachary, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, well, you know, first, this thing has been gone over and over and over. It's been beat to death. They haven't found an audience for it. All the polls showed the ads talking about Ayers didn't work, but they keep using it. And that, I think, brings to the point there's a lack of anything else in the campaign to talk about. Now, what was good last night was that Obama was able to totally take apart, totally tell everyone what the whole situation is with Ayers. Ayers, who, by the way, was pointed to this foundation, or this board that Obama also sat on, by the Annenberg Foundation. Republicans, close friends of the Reagans. This was a board that they sat on because of the Annenbergs, not because they met and decided to set up something together, something nefarious that everyone in the Republican Party seems to be alluding to. So I think, you know, it hasn't worked, it doesn't work, but they keep talking about it because they've got nothing else.
Okay, let me ask Jim, as a consultant, if you agree with either Zach or Stuart there. I mean, to keep honing in on what is, okay, Acorn, what McCain perceives as Acorn's past sins, but actually, I mean, it's the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. It's a community activist group. Is that the best target McCain could take?
Well, what they need to do is draw a thread and connect all of these various relationships that Obama has to paint a picture of why he would be so risky for the country. I mean, look, Acorn is one of the most left-wing organizations in the country. They're currently perpetrating massive voter registration fraud. Ayers is a radical of the most despicable sort. It's a wonder he's not in federal prison. But look draw a thread between other ties, too. I mean, Obama's huge contributions from the teachers union are a big reason why his school reform plans are so bankrupt. He's got the most liberal voting record in the Senate. I mean, McCain just came out, for example, with a plan that would cut capital gains taxes for ordinary Americans who want to invest in companies in our economy. That's a huge economic benefit. Obama, on the other hand, wants to attack companies, tax corporations, demonize American innovation and business, all from this left-wing, deeply liberal perspective that includes Ayers, Acorn, the teachers' unions. And so strategically, McCain needs to tie those together and show the public why handing over the reins of government to people that are this anti-business, this so far left, and this kind of redistributionist policies is so dangerous. They make that connection, and it's going to resonate. And I wish McCain would make that point more strongly.
Okay, Astro, your response there.
Putting aside the truth of any of these things and just looking practically at how these attacks are made, in order to make accusations, you have to be credible. You have to earn your right to these accusations. Let me use an example from last night. McCain told the American public that he repudiated people saying nasty things about Obama and implied very strongly that they were said by radical fringe elements who showed up at his rallies, when in fact it's his running mate who's been saying this issue about him palling around with terrorists, which he has not repudiated. And then, even though he suggested this was a bad thing, he connected Obama to terrorists through Chavez, again, last night during the debate. I think these things are duplicitous enough that they turn the American public off. So whether or not there's a problem, say, between Senator Obama and Acorn, no one's listening to him because he's often enough making connections that aren't there and being dishonest with the American public that I think they're tuning him out on subjects that may be true. They've lost their interest in listening. I think that's the problem.
Stuart, jump in.
Well, Astrid, what are you talking about that is untrue here, that it's being fabricated in this situation? Are you suggesting that he didn't have relations with Ayers and Dorn? And you're suggesting that he really was a guy who hang on, that all of you would indicate is one of the most intelligent guys you've ever seen running for the presidency, who would claim that he was so dumb he didn't know their history, he didn't know who they were, that there's not a thread of very radical relationships here? You're suggesting that because Sarah Palin calls them out, that somehow discounts the credibility of those arguments? Excuse me, that's not realistic.
That's not what I said at all. I said let's
You did. You said Sarah Palin
all those
was
issues
making
you just
arguments
described
that
and put them on the side. Right.
Well, put them on the side, but that's not what I'd like to do. I'd like to hear him address them once.
No, put the Ayers and Acorn issues on the side. Well, Senator McCain said last night that it's wrong to allow the kind of deep, divisive, negative name-calling that's been going on both sides. And he said that he doesn't approve of it. And he said very clearly that when those things were being said, they were being said by individuals at the back of an audience at his rallies. He said that during the debate. I think that that's disingenuous in as much as it's actually his running mate. Again, whether or not it's true or not, that's not what I'm debating.
She's not called out racism. John Lewis, if I don't have his first name wrong, a wonderful black man who certainly has the credentials to talk. For God's sake, here's a guy who tried to make John McCain George Wallace. If this isn't calling up racist cards and playing the racist game, what is? That is wrong, and it shouldn't happen.
Well, let's talk about what that was brought up about. That was talked about because you have rally after rally, especially the rallies that Sarah Palin is hosting, having people yelling, terrorists, kill him.
Yeah, and people go on the Daily Kos every day, and Barack Obama posts there, and it is the most obscene and nasty website in the world. And Barack Obama doesn't discount the Daily Kos, does he?
We're talking about having someone in front of you.
We're talking about everything you influence in life here, really.
I understand the difference there because this is an actual public encounter, face-to-face.
He could say no to what's on the Daily Kos.
Someone in my group here, if someone had said, John McCain is a terrorist, we should kill him, I would immediately reprimand that person.
No, wait a minute.
She didn't.
What has she said that incited that, and what has she not said to slow that down?
One thing that incited it is that this constant referral that he's palling around with terrorists.
Well, he is.
And then you have lines. You have lines.
You're trying to deny the reality that
he
launched his senatorial campaign in the home of Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers. And these are people who tried to kill people.
You know what? Now the point made in this debate is that we've seen why the Republicans won't drop that point, because they believe it's very true.
I'm not sure it's working. I'm not sure it's been effectively done. But the point is, I don't believe for a moment that it's dishonest or unfair to ask the question. That's what I'm saying.
It's the only tool in your toolbox.
No, I don't think that's true either. I think Joe the Plumber is going to be a big toolbox for us.
I'd like to get to Joe the Plumber in just a second, but I'd actually like to first get to a point that you were actually making in your first response here. It's the question over how much of Obama's poll lead is actually due to his performance in this campaign, his winning over the public on the issues, versus just the abysmal state of the economy, which many voters immediately associate with the leadership of the Republican Party under George W. Bush. Jim in New York, let me get that question to you first.
Yeah, look, I mean, McCain's got to really make the case a lot more strongly about why his free market ideas, lowering the capital gains tax, are going to be a benefit. I mean, it's not that hard to do. Obama's hostility to business, to capitalism, to innovation is obvious and plain to see. He last night tried to demonize large companies in the oil, energy sector, on Wall Street. I mean, it's easy to do that, but these are real people who have shareholders with investments, 401ks. These are Americans. This is our economy that we're talking about. So making the free market case about why lowering capital gains and helping steer us through what could be a regulatory nightmare is so important. And it's not hard to do that. I mean, Obama's antipathy for business is plain to see, but McCain's got to make a more coherent case about why free market capitalism is essential going through this financial crisis. And I'd like to see him tie it together that way. I mean, hit harder on why a left-wing presidency with a left-wing Congress is going to be, I mean, really catastrophic if that's what happens during this period.
Okay, Astro, I'll tell you what, we got just 30 seconds left, so just let me get your thoughts on that before we go to break. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that the economy state is going to hurt McCain as much as people are saying. I think when you look at the last presidential race, President Bush used fear very effectively in helping him to gain the White House. And I think that the base that he got to respond to fear in that way, I think McCain can use driving fear in people. Fear is powerful right now, and I think McCain can use that.
Okay, Astro, you will have the final word. Just for this half of the program, we need to take that 12-minute break now for news and weather, but we will continue this discussion after that time. All of our panelists return, so do stay with us. Welcome back to the debate on France24, where we have been discussing the final debate in the U.S. presidential campaign last night, looking at some of the finer points. And joining me again to continue that discussion here in the studio to my right, Stuart Hogan, Vice President of Republicans Abroad France. Here to my left, Zachary Miller, Chair of the Minority Caucus for Democrats Abroad France, via satellite from New York. Jim McCarthy, Crisis Manager at Counterpoint Strategies, a communications consultant. And from San Francisco, Astro Teller, CEO of Cerebellum Capital, also a young leader of the French-American Foundation. Thanks all so much for joining us again. Let's get straight then to one of the highlights of last night's face-off, which Stuart alluded to. It is something that has really consumed the U.S. media the day after the debate. Let's get a piece of that now.
Senator Obama was out in Ohio, and he had an encounter with a guy who's a plumber. His name is Joe Wurzelberger. Joe wants to buy the business that he's been in for all these years, worked 10, 12 hours a day. And he wanted to buy the business, but he looked at your tax plan, and he saw that he was going to pay much higher taxes. You were going to put him in a higher tax bracket, which was going to increase his taxes, which was going to cause him not to be able to employ people, which Joe was trying to realize the American dream.
I think tax policy is a major difference between Senator McCain and myself. And we both want to cut taxes. The difference is who we want to cut taxes for. Now, Senator McCain, the centerpiece of his economic proposal is to provide $200 billion in additional tax breaks to some of the wealthiest corporations in America. ExxonMobil and other oil companies, for example, would get an additional $4 billion in tax breaks. What I've said is I want to provide a tax cut for 95% of working Americans.
Okay, well, actually, Barack Obama himself had to go on and address Joe the plumber directly. Joe the plumber, who was mentioned 23 times over the course of the debate.
He became a rich man somehow. Here he is.
Yeah, with his own reality show, as we talked about during the break. He's the new star. I mean, he's still undecided, though, even though he leans toward McCain, but he's now seen by some as kind of symbolic of the middle class struggle. Let me start with Jim in New York. I mean, how much weight do you think this symbol of Joe the plumber suddenly holds here?
Well, again, a lot if McCain can connect it to the broader issues here. I mean, you notice when Obama calls for higher corporate taxes and attacks, companies, that isn't some, abstract entity. That's made up of shareholders who are real people, pension funds, 401ks, ordinary Americans like Joe the plumber, who are going to suffer under his leftist redistribution policies. So McCain's got to connect what Joe's doing great American innovation, Americans who are trying to invest, build capital, grow companies, and talk about how that applies across the board. I mean, at a time of real financial crisis, when Wall Street's hurting, McCain's got to connect that to real people. Joe's a great example, but there's lots of others, and he should really zap Obama on every front when he talks about this sort of anti-business, anti-capitalism message. And that's the way to connect the thread and make it, resonate.
Okay, Astor, let me ask you, though, do you think this could possibly backfire? Because Barack Obama went on to say, Joe the plumber is exactly the kind of guy that's going to benefit from my tax scheme because he won't earn over $250,000 a year, and actually his, protégés would go on to benefit from my tax cuts as well.
I think it's possible that he will benefit from it. I think the real issue here is not exactly how much Joe makes. We're going to argue about that till the cows come home. It's a philosophy issue. Look, I run a hedge funds, right? So I'm sort of supposed to be a poster child for the sort of person who would run in fear of someone like Barack Obama. I personally agree with him on this subject. I am not worried that my business will suffer. And here's the reason why. I pay my employees well. I give them a share of my company. The reason I do that is because I believe that when they're happy and healthy and well-motivated, I personally will get more. Barack Obama, whether you agree with him or not, believes in trickle-up economics instead of trickle-down economics. He believes that by making the people who need the most help in the country healthier, happier, and more successful, that it will actually make the wealthiest people in the country more wealthy. And Senator McCain believes roughly the inverse. This is just a philosophy point that people are not going to switch sides on in the next 3 weeks, and Joe the plumber is going to be used by both sides as their poster child without really changing many people's minds, I believe.
Okay, interesting. I mean, what do you think, Stuart, as far as the strategy of this is concerned, though, for the Republicans? I mean, McCain's never met him. This was actually Obama's encounter, but he calls him my old buddy, Joe the plumber. Even though Joe the plumber apparently isn't registered to vote, I've heard.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I was, Politico.com.
You could be right, I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, do you really think this is the kind of strategy the Republicans want to use to kind of bring another Sarah Palin into the mix, just this unknown kind of poster child for change?
Specifically, I think it's this icon, this iconic, now we have a tangible physical example of exactly what John McCain's been trying to communicate and doing rather poorly, unfortunately. This person who is probably going to be grossing somewhere over $250,000, even though he's going to pay it to his people, but because it's his business, he'll probably end up paying taxes on that under Barack Obama's plan. I think that there's, and again, your guy in New York at the Capital Strategies Group said something was very important too. You have to understand, it's like talking about corporation tax. Corporations pay tax just like houses pay real estate tax. Houses don't pay real estate tax. The people who live in them do. Corporations don't pay corporate tax. The people who own them do. The owners, you and me and Zach, people who invest their money, who strive to earn something and put it into their savings plan. So I think what we have in Joe the Plumber is an icon for this, as was said by one of our guests here, this hatred of success in the corporate world. And this from a guy who, he and his wife booked $4.5 million last year of income. So I'm a little puzzled by why he wants to take money out of the pocket of Joe the plumber at $250,000. This is not a rich guy, okay? And I don't believe it's going to stop at $250,000. As Joe the plumber said today, or on Katie Couric's show after the debate, said, well, it's kind of a slippery slope, isn't it? You start at $250, probably go to $150, $100, because when he doesn't have enough money to pay for all those programs he wants to spend money on, where is he going to get it? He's going to redefine rich, downward, downward, and downward. And I think Joe the plumber is going to be the icon. And I think if we have a game-changing potential here, Joe the plumber represents an image of it.
Okay. Zach?
Well, let me give you a different perspective from Ohio. I, too, am from Ohio. I'm from Akron, Ohio. Akron, Ohio was once the rubber capital of the world. My father worked at Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. He was a tire builder. My uncles worked for various rubber companies. These companies left Akron as steel companies left Youngstown.
You don't think that had anything to do with the huge corporate taxes we pay?
Breathe for a moment. Let me finish my point, okay?
I'll let you do that now.
What happened was corporate greed, looking only to the next quarter, made these companies leave our country and go to other countries and pay less taxes, or some cases no taxes at all. Barack Obama doesn't want to take money from people. He wants people to have jobs. It was best described today in today's International Herald Tribune. The whole economic plan of McCain and Obama were compared. Tax cuts geared especially to individuals and corporations at the top of the income scale in a belief that will stimulate the economy and create jobs. That trickle-down theory. This is McCain's plan. Well, it hasn't worked. It's because of this that we're in the situation that we are. So it's more of the same. Now, what Obama's plan is tax cuts intended for middle class and low-wage workers, for the smallest businesses and spending to increase public works, to increase jobs. We want to create 5 million new jobs in a renewable energy situation. No, I'm talking about
I should get to respond on this one.
I'm talking about the economic plan.
Because you're mixing a couple of things. You yourself said jobs left Akron, Ohio, possibly to pay lower taxes elsewhere. American corporations pay the second highest tax rate in the developed world. It's a ridiculous concept because, again, corporations don't pay taxes. The people who own the corporations do. This is a place where we're driving Barack Obama's own plan, and his hatred of corporate worlds is going to drive further. It's going to drive more jobs offshore.
Sure, you're an attorney. You understand.
I am not an attorney. I'm a businessman.
Okay, well,
please don't.
Okay,
that is the biggest insult you've ever thrown at me.
You understand tax schemes and dodging corporate taxes better than anybody in this building. And you know that a lot of these companies, they get a Cayman Islands address, and they don't pay taxes. There's 12,000 American companies in one building in the Cayman Islands.
Probably a lot of them would come home if we had a reasonable tax rate, too.
We have a reasonable tax rate. But what they don't want
is... It's the second highest in the developed world. It's ridiculous.
Greed, and the American people have found out it's about greed so far.
All right. You know what? I'm going to come back to just running out of time here. So there was a couple other points I wanted to get to. And I've heard some feedback on last night's debate saying it was unique in the context of the other three. Because for once they had a moderator this time that actually asked really direct and more difficult questions on domestic policy, and he tended to get a little more involved. This is Bob Schieffer, of course, from CBS News, when he felt the candidates weren't exactly answering directly. He confronted both of them on their negative campaigning and said, you know, you both pledged to take the high ground, and now the American public is saying this is one of the most negative campaigns they've ever seen. Jim, let me ask you first. Do you think last night's debate, in that respect, you know, having a moderator that said, okay, I want you two to go face-to-face on your negative campaigning that both of you are guilty of, did that give the American people some real exposure then to the two candidates that are at this here?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Lincoln-Douglas style debate, as it's called, where the candidates, you know, cross-examine one another. And I think that the public does find that compelling. But on the other hand, I do wish that the candidates, you know, McCain especially, would push back on the press a little bit more. I mean, they treat guys like Bob Schieffer and Gwen Ifill and Jim Lehrer with this kind of, you know, voice of God reverence when they're ignoring hugely important issues. I mean, for example, the topic of the Second Amendment about gun control in the United States has not once come up in any of these national debates. That's astounding because, you know, given what the Democrats in Congress and Obama want to do versus what the Supreme Court has said, that we all have the right to bear arms, is a huge issue in the country, and yet it's been completely overlooked by the media. McCain ought to hold them accountable for that. And then as far as the specifics are concerned, I mean, I'm not sure Schieffer really pinned Obama down that much last night. I mean, he kept waffling on different points. Take the Supreme Court, for example. Obama claimed that he would have no litmus test for judges, and yet he voted no against Justice Alito and Justice Roberts. I mean, there's a wide open opportunity to ask him point blank, you know, how do you reconcile that? Why'd you vote no on these two great justices if you don't have a supposed litmus test? So I think the media's gotten a little bit of a pass. They're lucky they haven't gotten, you know, a few uppercuts headed their way. And again, I think that's a great opportunity for McCain. I wish he'd seize on it.
Okay, Astro.
I'm really glad that the question was asked. Frankly, I think neither of them handled it very well. During the debate last night in particular, both of them hid behind the fact that it's a tough conversation, a tough debate, and a tough time over the last 2 months. I accept that, but I don't think either of them really got to the heart of the fact that there's a lot of negative campaigning. I don't think that it's equal. I think McCain's campaign is more negative, but I don't think that Obama's campaign is free of it either. And I think in the end, voters are going to respond to the one that seems more presidential, as was said earlier. And one of the ways to seem presidential is to be above the fray of the negative campaigning. I'd like to say that I think Bob Schaefer was excellent. I think that he hit a number of good points. I think he was fair in the way that he addressed them, and he pushed both candidates to speak their mind and to not get out of things. So I think he did an excellent job last night.
Okay. We're down to our last 2 minutes, very unfortunately, so I'd like to get to one last question. As we said at the top, you know, the polls, CBS's poll of uncommitted voters, 53-22 in favor of Obama. CNN's poll of debate watchers, 58-31, Obama's favor. But still, Zach, let me start with you. There is still this concern, and I know you've heard it, that people favor Obama in the polls, but when they go to cast their anonymous vote, somehow they're going to be scared to actually cast their vote for the first black president. Is that a concern of yours?
It's not a real concern of mine. The so-called Bradley effect that you're talking about is something that's been a theory for a long time. It's no concrete evidence of it. I think people often make up their mind at the last moment inside the polling booth, but it's not something that we're concerned about. We're more concerned about Republican dirty tricks. We're more concerned about what's going to happen in the polling areas, if there'll be ballots for people when they show up. These kind of things, these kind of problems that we've had, these concrete problems that we've had in elections both in Ohio and Florida, those are the kind of things we're more concerned about.
Okay. Stuart?
Well, I'm just not even going to touch the Republican dirty tricks thing with what's going on with Acorn and the bogus registrations. But I think that the simple thing here, you have to come back to 45, despite the fact he came out with a winning margin on the debate, 45% of Americans still say they don't think Barack Obama is ready to be president, or they have real questions about that. What I don't want to see happen here is him lose this election and somebody turn this into a matter of race. There will be some Neanderthals in America who still can't find their way around that. I do think America's ready to elect a black president. I just hope it's not this one because of his politics. And I think I'll even give it up on experience and all of the rest. I just don't like his politics, and I hope that we don't end up with that.
Okay, Stuart, you will have the final word for this
Stuart's
edition of the
holding
debate.
out
Okay. He's waiting for Zachary.
You're my go-to
I'd
guy.
like to thank all four of our panelists so much for joining us tonight. That is all, unfortunately, for this edition of the debate. Another edition then on Monday. Do join us then. Bonsoir.